Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name's Danielle and I'm the owner of Damn Fancy Creations and the Drunk Flamingo Glitter. In today's tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make this fun 3D turtle tumbler that so many of you guys loved that I ended up making a pre-order so that you guys could order your own versions. I love this tumbler so much. It actually came out exactly how I envisioned in my head, which never happens. Usually I change things so much from the time I start a tumbler to the time it gets finished. But this one, I just stayed with my vision because everything was coming together how I wanted it to, or even better. Everything you see listed here will be covered in today's tutorial, but if you guys have questions, just come back and ask and I'll answer them for you. If you aren't already, go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any upcoming tutorials. If you want a supplies list, everything is listed in the description, as well as discount codes from my favorite suppliers. All right, guys, let's get started on this fun tumbler. Alright guys, so if y'all are in my Drunk Flamingo glitter group, y'all probably already saw this tutorial. I did a live on this tutorial and then I finished it up in my craft room and just turned it into a YouTube tutorial that's a little bit of a condensed version. But basically I was just showing off all of my new vinyl patterns that I had. I had a few kind of what I'm calling oyster patterns because they kind of resemble an oyster, and a few other geode patterns that are also up for grabs on thedrunkflamingo.com. I did end up settling on this kind of gray blue oyster pattern, and I'm just starting by trimming off all of the white edges. And I wanted to kind of stick with this blue color scheme. It kind of reminded me of the ocean, and since I was putting bubbles on it, I wanted kind of an ocean feel. I wasn't even planning on adding turtles to the cup until I think it was Rachel maybe that said something on the live about adding turtles, and then they got added. So I'm just going to start by laying my tumbler against the vinyl, and I'm just going to mark the height of the cup. So now that I have that little dot marked, I'm just going to take this to my paper cutter and cut a straight line. So this is the only little piece that we're going to be using for our tumbler. I just wanted to wrap the top half with the vinyl, and then the bottom half was going to be the UV resin and bubbles. So I would typically draw a straight edge on my cup with my Cami Page cup cradle, but since this tumbler does have a handle, I'm just going to use the handle as my guide. And I thought that would work out really well, but I don't actually think that these handles are lined up perfectly on tumblers. So I did have to adjust it a little bit. But once you get your vinyl laid out correctly, then we are just going to remove the backing as we are pressing that vinyl down. And I went ahead and I can't remember what I did actually. I changed the way I did this from the time now until the other cups that I did, because I was trying to find the best way to get that vinyl to wrap around. So what I did on this tumbler was actually use a hole punch, because I thought, oh, this will be great. It's going to be a round hole that will fit right around that little handle. Well, it wasn't that great because the handle, the little hole for the handle was a lot larger than the hole punch hole. So it kind of worked, but in the end, I ended up just cutting a slit in the vinyl and laying it flat and then kind of cutting around the handle with my blade. And that worked out a lot better than me trying to hole punch this. But since I am foiling the handle and also I was planning to rhinestone around them, for me, this isn't something that had to be perfect. So I'm just smoothing down that vinyl. I like to use my squeegee just so I can make sure that no air bubbles are popping up. So now I'm just lining up the vinyl the best I can on the top and bottom. And if you guys know me, I like to try to hide my seams as best as I can. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So I'm just showing off Brooke's lovely little edging tools. This pink one is for tumblers with handles or mugs with handles. So that way you can edge around the entire cup and that handle is not going to hit anything. So those are all Brooke's tools. We do have a discount code that is listed below. So now I am finding that little piece of vinyl that we cut off. And I am going to cut a little piece of this vinyl so we don't have just a random straight edge on our cup. If you guys have watched my tutorials, y'all have seen me do this a million times. And if I can't disguise it with vinyl, then I'll try to disguise it with markers or inks or something like that. So we're just going to peel off that piece and then match it up to the other side. And this is the same pattern. The pattern is a repeated pattern. So you just find the little piece that matches up and you can cut it out. And now I'm just cleaning up any little vinyl that may be around the tumbler handle. And then I had just a tiny piece of vinyl that I could have gotten with the cup cradle, or sorry, the cup edging tool, but I didn't feel like adjusting my blade. And I just save any little scrap that I have because you never know when I'm gonna need it. So I'm taping off my edge because I typically do not epoxy around the bottom of my cups. It's funny how your preferences change. Before, when I did tumblers to sell, I always did the bottoms, but now I hardly ever do bottoms. So this is Miss Lillian's No Wax Chalk Paint. I also get this from Cami Page Boutique. I have a few colors of this paint and I really like it a lot. And I thought that this mint color went really well with the vinyl. I don't know the color off the top of my head, but I will link it below. It's a long name. I can't remember it. And I will say that on the other cups that I did actually spray paint the bottom, and I kind of ombre'd that spray paint up into the vinyl so that there wasn't such a harsh line between the paint and the vinyl. Now, if you don't want to use spray paint and if you would rather use a chalk paint or acrylic paint, then I would suggest getting a sponge or something like that. And then just kind of like dabbing that paint up into the vinyl so it disguises that line. So there's not such a noticeable difference between the paint and the vinyl. Now, after I, UV resin and mica and everything, you couldn't really see the line too much. But on my spray painted cups where I just kind of ombre that spray paint up into the vinyl, you can't tell that there's a line there at all. And I'm just kind of touching up some little pieces around the handle that were maybe a little bit more noticeable where I cut. This paint worked really well. It blended in nicely with the colors. So I let the first coat dry, and now I'm going in with a second coat. That is one thing with chalk paint. You do need to make sure that it is dry before you start your second coat, or you're basically going to remove the first layer of paint and it's just going to look splotchy. If you want to speed up the paint drying process, you can always get out your heat gun and just turn it on a very low setting, and that will just help it dry quicker. So I'm going to let this dry completely. I'm going to get out my heat gun and also dry it with my heat gun, so that speeds it up a little bit. And then we're going to break out the mica and the UV resin. Okay, so now that our paint is dry, we're going to just put this on the turner. I'm not really going to use the turner for anything. I'm just using it so my cup is up off of my table. This is my UV light that I use. It is from Amazon. And I like to just have it plugged in and turned on so that when I need to hit my UV resin with it, all I have to do is pick the light up and shine it on there. So we're just going to get a little bit of Dawn dish soap, mix it with water, and you need a little straw. And then you need some UV resin. The UV resin that I'm currently using is Let's Resin. I actually really like that UV resin. I can hit it with my light and I feel like it's completely dry in 20 seconds. So when we're putting our UV resin on our tumbler, you don't want to do too thick of a layer, but you don't want to do really thin layers. I would say like a medium coverage, judging like if you were going to epoxy a cup, you don't want to use a small amount like you were doing the epoxy method in glitter, but not quite as much as a flood coat, if that makes sense. I don't know. So I am removing my tape because I don't want to UV resin my tape to my tumbler. I'm just going to be really careful. And for this one, I did use this little sponge, or not sponge, this little silicone paintbrush. But for my other cups, I just used a glove finger. I think that was a lot easier. So we're basically just going to blow bubbles with our straw and put them onto our tumbler, and then hit that tumbler with our UV light. And then I'm just dabbing away any of the bubbles or suds with a microfiber towel. And then we're going to turn the cup a little bit. And we're going to do the same thing. So I'm just working in sections. Blowing our bubbles, placing them on the tumbler, and then hitting it with the UV light. So we are just going to repeat this process all the way around the cup. And a little trick, if you blow like quick, but not at the very bottom of your cup, kind of at the top of your cup, your bubbles are going to be smaller. If you blow kind of slower and at the bottom of your cup, your bubbles are going to be bigger. It was just something that I figured out, like, depending on like how you blow your bubbles and the location of the straw placement, you can kind of play with the bubble size. So some of my bubbles on my cups were super little tiny and sudsy, while others were larger. So I just kind of like to play with the size of them. And the little tiny ones turned out really cool. So once you have covered your whole tumbler with the UV resin and bubbles, we're just going to wipe everything off, and then we'll be ready to start applying this mica. And I did my lighter colors first because I knew if I did my darker colors first and then try to go back with the white, then that was not going to show up. So I just went around and just covered everything with a little bit of white. But you guys can see right here how you can see that line where the vinyl meets the paint. And it does get disguised with the mica. But I did have to do a couple layers of the mica and really kind of burnish it in there to disguise that line. But see, you can still see it here. So that's when I was like, what are we gonna do? And this is what actually gave me the idea of the gold leaf to try to help disguise some of that line. So the brush I'm using is just like it's a makeup brush, but it's just it's almost kind of like a stipple brush or a stencil brush, but for makeup. And the more I kind of worked that mica in to where that line was showing, the more it faded. So I just kind of kept working around the cup with my micas until I was happy with how everything looked. But already, like, I was loving these colors. I loved the bubbles with the vinyl. I just think it gave so much dimension. Isn't that so cool? I want to do a whole cup with the UV bubbles, but maybe with like a pink ombre or something. I don't know. I haven't done it yet, but that's my plan. So I was also kind of taking suggestions from the live audience that was watching. And I was kind of deciding on if I wanted to do like liquid gold accents or actually gold leaf accents. So I'm just closing up all of my mica right now so I don't get it everywhere, because that has happened more times than I can count. And then I went to go get my gold leaf to see what exactly I had. I've had this gold leaf for forever. It's one that my friend Neely gave me. And I'm going to use the adhesive from Artistic Painting Studio. This is what I use with the foils that I get from her. This is very similar to Tack It, but I do like it better. And I'm just getting just a stiff brush, and I'm just kind of dotting on the 3D sections of the bubbles. And I'm just doing this very lightly because I don't want to cover the entire bubble. I just want to kind of get the adhesive on the raised parts, if that makes sense. So like the bubble outline. And if you guys have not worked with Tack It or this adhesive from Artistic Painting Studios, I think that Southern Belle Glitter has one, but it is basically an adhesive that stays tacky even after it's dry. So when we put it on our tumbler or whatever you're going to be foiling, it's going to go on white, like you can see here now, and when it dries, it will dry clear. So we're just going to let this sit for a little bit. It can take a while to dry. If you do not use a heat gun or anything to help speed the drying process, I would wait about 30 minutes. If you use a heat gun or a hair dryer, you could probably get away with like 5 minutes. And you will see that my handle will never fully turn clear because the paintbrush that I used to apply the adhesive had some different shades of mica mixed in. So the adhesive turned kind of like a light blue. So it's going to be a light blue no matter what. So I am just going to start with a little bit of foil, and I'm just kind of dragging it across the tumbler until it catches, and that's where I know that that area is going to be tacky because it is clear, so you can't see where we place that adhesive. And again, I just like to use a stiff brush to kind of burnish that foil into the tumbler. And I think that it was this brush that I was using, all of the little bristles were coming out. I don't know what was going on. I think that brush was falling apart. So I had to pick out all the little bristles. And this other brush worked a lot better. So I'm just putting a few pieces of gold leaf on at a time because I don't want to get too much on there. I just want this gold leaf to kind of be an accent and just add to that distressed feeling of the tumbler. And I love how adding this gold leaf just added even more dimension to the cup. It really helped the outline of those bubbles just stand out even more. Because as I always say, I always let you guys know that you can have a little bit of dimension on your cup, but as soon as you put a layer of epoxy on it, it's going to smooth a lot of things out. So I always try to add as much dimension as I can before epoxy, so that if we lose a little bit of dimension, it will be okay because we added so much. So now we're going to do the handle. I know that this adhesive still looks like it's not dry, but it is dry. It's just because the adhesive kind of got dyed. So I'm just placing some little gold leaf sections on the handle, and then I'm just kind of wrapping it around the handle so that it is relatively smooth. I don't want huge chunks of gold leaf just hanging out on the handle. So I'm just trying to smooth it out as much as I can. And then I'm just brushing off any extra pieces that may be on there, just little loose pieces. And then I'm just doing another little sweep of the bottom of the tumbler, making sure I didn't miss any tacky parts or any bristles that got stuck in there. And then when you're happy with your tumbler, we're going to epoxy it. Now, when I'm working with gold leaf, I will typically seal this with either a clear spray, but usually liquid, but I am really careful with what sealers I use for gold leaf because some can react and make the gold leaf look streaky. So if you haven't used certain sealers with gold leaf before, I would test it on a section or two just to make sure you're not going to get anything weird. So I will epoxy 2 times, and then we're going to start working on the turtles. So these are my 2 little turtle molds. I have used them forever. I had a tutorial a while back where I used these molds to make epoxy turtles, and I demolded the turtles before the epoxy was completely cured. But I do not have any regular setting epoxy right now. All I have is fast set, and I tried it with fast set and it didn't work. So we're going back to my good old handy dandy polymer clay. I just dusted the inside of my molds with a light brown mica. And then I'm just going to put my clay in there. Now, since we're doing the molds with this brown mica, the color of your clay isn't going to matter too much. I would try to stay within like a neutral family, so brown, tan, gold, something like that, so that the color showing through is similar. But this color that I have right now is just something that I mixed up. It would even be cool to play with like blue micas with white clay to see what kind of colors we get. That would be fun also. But I'm just basically putting a little bit of clay in all of the fins and head. And then I'm going to get a little bit of a larger piece for his body. And we're just going to press that down. Make sure it's all in his little crevices. And I try to get my molds as flat as I can. So if you need to remove a little bit of clay, definitely remove some. And I just am shaping him on the cup how I want him. And I forgot that this mold, it has like a funny piece underneath his turtle head. So I just cut that off. I want it to sit flat to the cup. And I think the little baby has one too. It's like a little funny piece. So I'm just placing these on here, and I'm baking this on aluminum foil because sometimes polymer clay can bake to the tumbler and can be a little bit difficult to remove. So I always just bake it on aluminum foil. I will remove the painter's tape before I bake it, but I will bake this at 250 for an hour. But I know that my oven runs hot, so I always suggest getting an internal thermometer just so you know how your oven runs. Most clay, you're supposed to bake it around 275. Now, the longer that you bake your clay, the more time that those polymers have to bond together and be as strong as they can be. That's why I leave my clay in there for an hour. So now we're just going to detail the turtles. I am just kind of going over all of the little detailed lines with a really skinny paint pen, and then I'm also wiping it away. I want a little bit of distressing in texture, but I don't want it so sharp, which is why I'm wiping that black away after I put it on there. And I'm just going to do this for both turtles. Now, I will say, if you guys have questions about polymer clay, feel free to ask below. I do have several videos of me working with polymer clay. So we're just adding a little bit more texture to him again, because once we put that epoxy on there, a lot of these little lines and crevices are going to disappear under epoxy. And once I got my black kind of detailing on there, I decided that I wanted it to look like the turtles were kind of coming up out of that gold leaf. So I decided to add a gold leaf to half of their little bodies. So I just got out my adhesive again, and I'm just going to add a little bit to half of their little bodies. And I'm just kind of dotting it with my fingers again because I just want a distressed look. And make sure you're getting the sides of the fin as well, so it doesn't look like, you know, you just put a couple gold leaf on top. We want to make sure that their fins are all wrapped as well. So we're going to let that adhesive dry. And this was a very, very thin coat of that adhesive, so it's not going to take long at all for that to turn clear. So now we're going to leaf these little guys. So I am just kind of digging out some little pieces of gold leaf versus like a bigger sheet, because I want that to be a little bit more distressed. And I also got out a stiff brush so that I could really distress that gold leaf. Softer brushes are harder to do that with, but this is a very stiff brush, probably because I left paint in it for too long. So there's our little baby. So you can see how it's not just a solid sheet of gold leaf, it's just kind of distressed. That goes with the feel of the tumbler. Can you guys hear all the birds out today? It is definitely getting springtime in Georgia, and I love it. All right, so now we are going to add a little bit of the liquid leaf. I'm just going to use a little bit from my rose gold pen. I'm just going to kind of press a little bit out on this foil. And I'm just going to use something sharp to add a little bit more detailing to the turtle. You can use a toothpick if you have a really tiny paintbrush. This is just like a little sharp tool that I have. I'm pretty sure it came in a fondant kit that I had forever ago. But I have several of these little tools. And they all look like this. A hot mess. So I'm just adding a little bit of that liquid gold. Kind of like it's coming out of the gold leaf. Just so that even under epoxy, it's going to kind of shine and shimmer a little bit more. They look so cute. So now that we are done with our little turtles, we are going to attach them to our cup. And I was going to use E6000, which I have done in the past, but recently I decided that I was going to use hot glue. So I think that I even got out my liquid fusion because I use that a lot as well. I really switched to hot glue because I was annoyed it was taking so long for the liquid fusion to drop down to where I could use it. So this is my hot glue gun that I use. I like that it has a power button. It has a little light when it's on. You can take the battery out and charge that. I will link this below. The last time I checked, I think they were sold out of the pink one, but I think that they have a blue one, a blue option. So we're just going to let this heat up and then we're going to attach our turtles. So now the hot glue gun is all heated up. And we're just going to put a little bit of this hot glue on there because this is just going to hold the turtle to our tumbler. This isn't meant to be a permanent solution because as soon as I get the other turtle on there, we're going to seal this turtle with UV resin. Now, in a perfect world, this would have been clear hot glue, but I didn't have clear in it. But you can't tell that it's white anyway, so now we're going to turn that hot glue gun off. We're going to get out our UV resin and our UV light again. And what I like to do with 3D items is seal the edges with UV resin first, so that way if there's any trapped air under epoxy, it's not going to bubble out as the epoxy cures. Sometimes you may get like bubbles that try to seep out, and we definitely don't want that. So I'm just holding down some of these his little leg and his little fin, just so it's closer to the tumbler. All right, so you guys will kind of see me. I'm just going to take this UV resin and we're just going to put it right along the edge of the polymer clay where it meets the tumbler. And I just work in sections around the cup. So I'm just squirting it right along the turtle's edge. So here you can see it a little bit better where you can see that UV resin along the edge. And then I'm just curing it with my UV light. And I'm just hitting it with the light just enough to stop the movement, because by the time that both turtles have been completed, the UV resin will have been hit with that UV light enough times to cure it completely. So I'm just gonna set this light up a little bit and let it cure the rest of that resin. And then we're going to coat the entire turtle with UV resin as well. So now we're going to grab the little turtle and I'm just going to squirt UV resin right on top of him. And we're just doing a thin coat, but I have found that if I coat my 3D objects with a coat of UV resin first before I take it downstairs and epoxy, it makes it a little bit easier because it goes ahead and fills in any of those little cracks and crevices that may be harder to get to with just a gloved finger and epoxy. So I'm just going over the edges and the top of both turtles, and then we're going to cure that with the UV light. And then we're going to do the other little turtle. And if you're using a paintbrush like me, make sure you clean it out with acetone or alcohol when you're done, so it doesn't get hard and stiff like half of my paintbrushes. So I'm just going to set this light up there and cure that other little turtle while I'm cleaning my brush out with some alcohol. So now my brush is good to go. Our little turtles are almost ready. And once they are complete, we are going to take this downstairs and put another coat of epoxy on him. Or not even downstairs. I forgot that I did this little guy upstairs in my office. So I am not covering my leopard table cover because this is an epoxy mat that is from Artistry Epoxy. And if you get epoxy on this mat, you can just pop it right off. So we're just going to coat everything in epoxy. We'll even do the little turtles. I always start with the edges first. So I will coat the edges of the little turtle, and then I will do the top part of him. And I am really just kind of digging out as much epoxy as I can from the sides of the turtle and between his little fins and feet and in between each turtle. We want them to be covered, but we don't want there to be too much epoxy so that it pulls around the turtle and causes micro bubbles. That is what we don't want. So I did one coat of epoxy and then I sanded it, make sure everything was smooth, and then I did my final coat of epoxy. And after your final coat of epoxy, then you can start rhinestoning the handle or anything else that you want to rhinestone. I just had my little baby torch upstairs, which surprisingly worked really well to pop bubbles. So we will let this cure, and then we will start rhinestoning. So here is what the tumbler looks like before we add our rhinestones. I love how it turned out. These are the stones we're using from Diamond Fire. They are called Sunset. These are the same stones I used to do my big 40-ounce Simple Modern tumbler. And I'm going to be using Liquid Fusion. And I love these stones because they do have a blue and then a slight kind of gold orange shift to them. So I thought they would be perfect for this tumbler. So I'm just going to be rhinestoning around the handles. So I'm just squirting out a little bit of adhesive, and I'm just going to use my wax picker. And we're just going to place these around the handle. And I just kind of, went with what I was feeling. I didn't really go in with too much of a plan. I just want to scatter them. And of course, I'm out of frame for half of this. Maybe I get better at it. Hopefully I do. So I just do one row around the handle, and then one row out and one row up. And then I add a couple little scattered stones. And I was not keeping these stones super, I don't know. I wasn't fitting them into the gaps. I was just kind of placing them to make them look more sporadic, if that makes sense. And then I do one row on the actual handle itself. And this one would not get off of my picker. So now I'm just putting just little tiny drops of glue kind of coming out from that little burst. And these are just going to be little sporadic crystals. And these stones that I'm using are mixed sizes. I mainly use the SS20 for my Simple Modern tumbler, but I also had a mixed pack of the little sizes for filler, and that is what I'm using for this tutorial. So I'm just placing those little stones wherever I put those little drops of glue. And I have used Liquid Fusion since 2015 to attach rhinestones, and I've never had an issue with them. I've used them for tumblers, for Uggs, Nikes, all sorts of things, and I can wash my cups just fine, and I never have an issue with anything popping off. I will say that when you do wash your tumblers, if they have rhinestones on them, make sure that you're using cool water. Do not use super hot water because that could loosen the adhesive. So now we're going to do the same thing on the bottom handle. We're just going to do one row of stones around the handle itself. The only downside to Liquid Fusion is that it takes a little bit longer to dry than some other adhesives. I know that the There isn't another white adhesive that I have used, Loctite maybe, and there isn't any movement. However, since it's white, if I really want to get those crystals super close together, I can't see it. With the clear adhesive, I can see it a little bit better of where exactly I want to place my crystals in relation to the other stones that are already on the cup, if that makes sense. So now we're doing a layer of rhinestones on the handle itself, just like the top. And I'm going to use my wax pencil and just do smaller dots of glue, because with the nozzle on the bottle, they were a little larger than I would have liked. So I'm just using my wax pencil, and then I'm just going to wipe it off. So we're just placing the remaining crystals. And liquid fusion, I believe, takes 2 hours to dry, but I would wait a full 24 hours before you decide to wash your tumbler. And I always like to keep an eye on it just in case there are any shifts or movement, so that you can go back and catch it before the adhesive dries, especially on a tumbler where everything is sitting upright. I may have actually put this in my cup cradle so that those crystals could dry. But look how pretty it is, y'all. I love it so much. Look how pretty that turned out. So here are some finished pictures of this tumbler. I just love all of the colors. It just reminds me kind of like a rusted, sunken treasure ship. I don't know. Just like the gold and the crystals and the blue. It's so pretty. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. And if y'all decide to give this tumbler a shot, please post it in my groups, because I love to see what you guys create from tutorials that I put out there and how you guys put your own spin on them. That is why I put these videos out, is for y'all. If you enjoyed this tutorial or learned something new, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to catch the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, or tutorials, be sure to check out my Damn Fancy tutorial group, my Drunk Flamingo glitter group, or my Damn Fancy tribe. All are linked in the description. Thanks for watching!